We all love a good superweapon in Star Wars, something that really raises the stakes. And for me, the most unique one is without a doubt the Starforge, and it's probably my personal favourite. What the Starforge provides, what it represents historically, and the general en masse of what it could achieve was simply unparalleled. But I, like many of you, witnessed the thing get destroyed at the end of KOTOR. The Republic took out its stabilizers, and we watched the Starforge plummet into the very star that gave it life and provided the source of its nutrition to pump out all of its marvelous creations. But what if I told you that the Starforge actually survived? Yes, it was destroyed, and yes, it was never the same machine that it originally was. But the Starforge itself and the technology that drove it actually continued to manifest beyond its destruction in Knights of the Old Republic 1. But first and foremost, we have to understand what the Starforge really is. Is it just this machine that uses the dark side to create stuff? No. It's a common misconception that the Starforge was just this machine that was fueled by the dark side of the Force. But in actuality, it was almost alive. It was almost sentient. This sentience corrupted those that used its power, and it fed off of that very corruption. The Starforge was almost responsible for the eventual fall of the Infinite Empire. The corruption that was found within the Rakata was amplified tenfold by the Starforge's desire to feed upon it. This desire for death and darkness eventually allowed it to get to a point where the technology itself fused with the very dark side of the Force, and became this almost self-sustaining semi-sentient creature. And unlike something like the Death Star, or the Sun Crusher, or the Mass Shadow Generator, the Starforge was wholly unique in that it was actually amplified by the misery and the pain that it caused, to the point where it actually couldn't be destroyed. Now, contrary to what we directly see in the game, a portion of the Starforge actually exploded, and the remains of the Starforge actually littered Rakata Prime and its orbit. Now, Rakata Prime itself was a dark side nexus, and it wasn't just any dark side nexus. It was widely considered to be one of, or if not, the most powerful dark side nexus in Star Wars. This is backed up by Darth Bane, who goes on to say that the way the dark side flowed through Lehon was exponentially more potent than even Korriban. The Starforge was alive. The Starforge fed upon darkness to sustain itself. And so, in the atmosphere of Rakata Prime, over time, the remains of the Starforge began systematically piecing itself back together. It was self-sustaining. The metal that was floating within its atmosphere and orbit fused and created a planetary ring system around Rakata Prime. It had gone from being a ringless planet to a planet with a ring system made of metal. Now obviously it wasn't getting the same energy from the star that it used to, and so it couldn't rebuild itself to the point where it could begin creating stuff as it was made to do. It was limited in that capacity. But it's kind of fitting, I think, that the very weapon that was responsible for the Infinite Empire's eventual collapse, the very weapon that protected Rakata Prime for thousands of years, eventually encompassed the very planet in which its builders came from. Now, obviously, nobody in the galaxy actually knew what this ring around Rakata Prime was. The history of the Rakata and the Starforge were essentially forgotten and removed from history, so this entire thing was a mystery to most people. However, the ring surrounding the Starforge wasn't the only thing that survived. As we know, when Darth Revan took over the Starforge, he and Malak were fascinated, but the way Revan and Malak chose to go about their business was extremely different from one another. Malak was a brute. He saw things as tools to dominate, and he wanted to use them to their maximum potential without considering the repercussions that they may bring. He saw the Starforge in that very way. Whereas Revan, on the other hand, was tactical. Especially after the devastation of Malachor and the usage of superweapons, he became very cautious and decided to study the Starforge so that he could better understand it. And after some time, Revan realized that the machine corrupted. Revan wasn't doing what he was doing with the intent of being corrupted to the point of insanity. Yes, he was well within his dark persona at this point, but he knew that the Starforge clouded judgment with the offer of absolute power, and to him that wasn't worth it. He needed his mind, he needed clarity on his actions, and if the Starforge drove him to do things that were illogical for the sake of strength, that would completely go against his very intent. And so while Malak stayed on the Starforge to study the machine in all of its glory and to utilize its power at full potential, Revan took a tiny little fragment no bigger than a fingernail of the machine's hull, and he left the Starforge for good, and instead he decided to study this tiny little fragment of it. And Revan, when he could, never stepped foot in the Starforge or travelled to the Starforge if he could help it. And this was the difference between him and Malak. Revan stayed the course on what they were trying to achieve with rebuilding the Republic. Malak was corrupted to the point where he didn't care, and he just wanted to destroy and gain power. And it was the Starforge that actually caused their eventual split. The Starforge is corruption, and the Starforge itself became more powerful than it had been in thousands of years simply because of the amount of dark energy that it was consuming from Malak and all of the Sith that surrounded it. And it was in its element, churning out weapon after weapon, warship after warship. It once again was back to its prime. But Revan wanted to understand what made the Starforge tick, and so he took this fragment and, as I mentioned, studied it, and the technology amazed him. It was simply infinite. After more studying, he realized that the technology of the Starforge didn't just create weapons, it didn't just create means to destroy. It actually created life, provided it was given the force to sustain it and an external energy source that didn't even have to be a star. The technology would create water, it would create oxygen, it would create food, and all of the very building blocks that were necessary for life. Revan even theorized that if directed in the right way, the very fragment that he had alone could go on to create entire galaxies. But obviously, Revan knew that he couldn't study this fragment forever. He had a goal to achieve. But he knew that the fragment couldn't get into the wrong hands either. So he travelled to Nar Shaddaa, and he purchased, or maybe built, a big complex that was heavily defended, out of the way and almost undiscoverable, and gave the fragment to a group of aliens that served him known as the Ongri. He then taught the Ongri how to use the fragment to channel energy into life, and so the Ongri created their own ecosystem within this complex using the technology of the Starforge. When one of them died, they would feed their corpse to the fragment, and the fragment in return would provide them sustenance for living within the confines of the complex, so water and food. And not only that, but as it consumed this energy, it also began to grow. And by the time of the Old Republic MMO, around 300 years later, it turned into a massive machine that the Ongri had named the Infinite Engine. The Old Republic decides to have the Sith Empire capture technology that literally creates life out of nothing, and then they do absolutely nothing with it because it completely disappears. But hey, this whole thing was a cool questline, and there was a lot of fun extensions of the Starforge in the galaxy, even if there was no actual resolution to its existence. But these were just two examples of the Starforge managing to survive its destruction. Yes, it survived in a different way, but it survived nonetheless. It's self-sustaining, almost semi-sentient, and it managed to continue on. Now, I spoke about this in a video a few weeks ago regarding the Rakatans, and I know it's not the same Starforge, but the Rakatans actually managed to build another one, or at least they managed to begin the process of building a new one. After the Infinite Empire's collapse, a group of Rakatans fled into the unknown regions and created something known as the Rakatan Archipelago, and two of the tribes within this archipelago managed to overcome their savage nature in a way and focused again on their creation and expansion of technology. And tens of thousands of years after the fall of the Infinite Empire, this tribe began working on the means to rebuild the Starforge, and they actually begun construction of a brand new Starforge above the planet that they inhabited, and although it was small, it was a start. But obviously this story was eventually lost with the expanded universe, and we never got to see what became of that or how it would have affected the galaxy later down the line, but I thought that this was just a fun little fact to throw into this video in case you didn't know about the Rakatan Archipelago or you haven't seen my other videos. But there we have it, that is how the Starforge managed to survive its destruction at the hands of Revan and the Republic, and I want you to tell me down below, do you think they should have included the Starforge in a potential story that was set in the future? Because I think that that would have been pretty cool, but I want to know what you think. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button. It tells YouTube that you had an absolutely super duper time and it helps me out a great deal. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.